Aaron Teague rode home to the Verdigris Valley, 2 full years after the war was supposed to be over, braced with everything in him to find nothing left. His family's ranch burned to its bones, or seized for taxes, or simply rotted into the weeds. He was not braced in any way at all to find smoke curling up from his own chimney, his fences mended and his fields green and worked, and a quiet woman he had never seen in his life standing in his dead mother's garden as though she belonged there. He had left the Verdigris 4 years before, a young man of 24, to fight in a war everyone swore would be over by Christmas. His parents were both in the ground by then, and he had no wife and no brothers, so when he marched off, he simply closed up the family ranch and left it standing empty. The house his father had built, the land his family had broken, his mother's flower garden, the little rise where his parents lay buried. He'd ridden away certain he'd be back inside a year. The war had other plans. It went on for years instead of months, brutal beyond anything the young men who marched off so brave had imagined. And when it finally ended, Aaron Teague did not come home, because he had been taken prisoner in the last hard months of the fighting, and locked in a camp far from home, in conditions that killed more men than any battle, and he stayed there long after the surrender, while a broken country slowly sorted out the men it had forgotten. By the time he was released, gaunt and sick and half a ghost, it was a year past the war's end, and it took him another year to make his way home across a ruined, lawless country, working when he could, leaning on what charity he found. 4 years gone, all told. 2 of war and 2 of the long, terrible aftermath. And every soul who'd known him in the Verdigris Valley had long since counted Aaron Teague among the war's uncounted dead. He came home expecting ruin. An empty ranch, its owner presumed dead and gone 4 years, and such a place did not survive. It was burned by raiders, or claimed by squatters, or taken for unpaid taxes, or simply swallowed by the prairie. Aaron had made his peace with it over 2 years of imagining. He was coming home only to stand on the ground where his family's life had been, grieve it, and then figure out what a hollowed-out, forgotten soldier was supposed to do with whatever was left of his life. So when he came over the last rise and saw the smoke, he reined in hard and just stared. Smoke from the chimney, the fences along the road standing straight and mended, the fields he'd left fallow-plowed and growing, a few good head of cattle in a repaired corral where he'd left none at all, the house, his father's house, not burned, not fallen, but standing sound with the shutters painted and the porch swept. And as he rode closer, scarcely breathing, he saw his mother's flower garden, which should by every right have been 4 years dead under the weeds, blooming, tended, weeded, alive. Someone had been here for a long time. Someone had taken his ruined, dead family's place and loved it back to life while he rotted in a prison camp 2 years past the end of a war. Nobody remembered him dying in. And then the woman straightened up from among his mother's flowers, a basket of cut blooms on her arm, and saw the gaunt stranger on the worn horse in the yard, and went still as stone. She was perhaps in her middle 30s, plain and weathered and strong-handed, with the steady, careful look of a woman who has survived things. She looked at Aaron the way you look at something that cannot be real. And the basket of flowers slipped from her arm and spilled across the ground. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Aaron found his voice, rusty and uncertain. "This is the Teague place," he said. "My family's. I'm Aaron Teague. I've been gone a long time, the war, and after." He looked at the impossible thriving ranch, at the woman in his mother's garden. "By rights, this should all be gone. And I don't know you. Who are you, ma'am? What are you doing on my land?" The color had drained clean out of the woman's face. "Aaron Teague," she whispered. They said you were dead. Lost in the war, dead in the camps. Will told me you were surely dead." Her hand went to her mouth. "You're alive." "I'm alive," he said, baffled. "Barely, and 2 years late." "But how do you know my name? And how is my family's place standing here alive when it had no business surviving a single season, empty, let alone 4 years?" And the woman, her eyes filling, gave him the answer that would undo them both. "My name is Iris Vance," she said. "And you don't know me, Mr. Teague, but you knew my husband. Will Vance, he was in your regiment, in the war." Her voice shook. He spoke of you, and he sent me here, in a manner of speaking. He sent me to your land, she told him then, sitting on the porch of the house he'd thought was surely ash, the whole long, sorrowful story. Her husband, Will Vance, had served alongside Aaron in the war. Not close, perhaps, in the way of best friends, but in the way of men who share the same mud and the same fear and the same long marches. Will had spoken often in the camps of his little farm and his wife back home, and had heard Aaron speak, in turn, of the good Teague land in the Verdigris Valley, the home standing empty, waiting for him. Two homesick men trading pictures of the places they were fighting to get back to. Will Vance never got back to his. He was killed in the same hard last months of the war that saw Aaron taken prisoner, and Iris, his widow, was left with nothing. For the war had not stayed politely on its battlefields. Her own little farm had been burned to the ground by raiders in the lawless last year of the fighting. Everything she had gone up in smoke, and she'd been left a widow with no home, no husband, no family, and no place on God's earth to go. One of the countless women the war ground up. Forgot, before we marched off the last time, Iris said softly. We talked the way you do when you both know it might be the last time. And he told me, Iris, if it ever comes to the worst, if you're ever truly desperate and alone, there's good land in the Verdigris Valley. The Teague place belongs to a decent man named Aaron Teague, soldiered with. He'd heard you were likely taken or dead in the camps, that your place was surely standing empty, and that you were the kind of man who'd never grudge a soldier's widow shelter on land that would otherwise just rot. He said, you go there, Iris, and you keep it alive, and you tell him Will Vance sent you. She wiped her eyes. It was the last gift my husband had to give me, and when the raiders burned my home and I had nothing and nowhere, I remembered, and I came. She had come to the Verdigris Valley with nothing, found the Teague place standing empty exactly as Will had said, and moved in. Not as a thief, she swore, but as a caretaker. She had paid the back taxes with the very last of what she had, so the place wouldn't be seized, and then worked it the way she'd worked her own lost farm her whole hard life. Plowed and planted and mended and built up a little stock, fully, ready to hand it back the moment anyone came to claim it. She had kept Aaron's family's things safe in the house, tended his parents' graves, and put flowers there in the season, and brought his dead mother's garden back to blooming life, because a thing that beautiful ought not to die just because the war had killed the people who'd loved it. I never meant to keep it, Iris said. I meant to hold it, for whoever came. I had nowhere else, and Will sent me, and once I was here, I couldn't bear to let it die. It became the only thing I had left to love. She looked at him, with no guile in her, only a war widow's hard-won honesty. And now you've come home, alive, thank God, and it's yours, free and clear, taxes paid and fences sound and stock in the corral. I'll gather my things and go. I always knew this day might come. I'm only glad it came because you're alive, and not because they finally sold the place over a dead man's debts. And Aaron Teague, the hollowed-out, forgotten soldier who'd ridden home across a ruined country, expecting only ash, put his weathered face in his hands and wept. He wept for the strangeness and the mercy of it, that while he'd been dying by inches in a prison camp, certain everything he'd left behind was lost. A war widow he'd never met had been here keeping his family's whole life alive, paying his taxes, mending his fences, tending his parents' graves, blooming his mother's garden, on the strength of a few words from a dying man in a regiment. He wept for Will Vance, whom he remembered now, the homesick man who'd traded pictures of home in the mud, dead in the same fields that took 2 years of Aaron's life. He wept for all of it, the war that had broken them both, and the impossible kindness standing in front of him in the shape of his own thriving ranch. You knew Will, Iris said, watching his face. You remember him. I remember him, Aaron said when he could speak. And then he gave Iris Vance the only gift he had to give in return for the saving of his whole life. He told her about her husband. He told her the things a widow aches to know and almost never gets to hear, that Will Vance had been a good soldier and a kind man, that he'd spoken of her constantly, carried her like a light through the worst of it, that the other men had loved him for his steadiness. Aaron couldn't tell her the very end, They'd been separated by then, but he could tell her that the Will Vance he'd soldiered with had been a man worth grieving, who talked of his wife with a tenderness the hard men around him had envied. And Iris wept then too, the clean, grateful tears of a widow given back a piece of the husband the war had stolen. And the two of them sat together on the porch of the saved ranch and grieved and were grateful. Two casualties of the same war, brought together across all of it by one dying soldier's last words. She rose after a while to gather her things, as she'd said she would. "Wait," Aaron said. She stopped. He looked at her, at the strong, plain, steady war widow who had paid his taxes and mended his fences and bloomed his mother's flowers and tended his parents' graves, who had loved his family's land back to life out of nothing but survival and honor and a dead man's word, and who meant now to walk back out into a ruined country with nothing. The moment he returned, asking not one thing for herself. "I can't work this place alone," he said slowly. "That's the plain truth. 4 years gone, 2 of them in a camp that took most of what strength I had. I'm not the man who rode off, Iris, and you know this land now better than I do. It'd be a foolishness past bearing to send off the one person alive who knows how to keep it." He paused, and then said the truer thing, "And I think we've both been ground up by the same war and spit out the other side with nothing. You lost your will and your home. I lost 2 years and damn near my life and came home to a country that forgot me. And the only living, hopeful thing either of us has got is standing right here on this rise, this place you saved that I came home to. Don't go. Stay. There's room enough for 2 broken people to make something whole out of 1 good piece of land." Iris Vance searched his face a long moment. "You don't owe me that," she said quietly. "I held the place out of need as much as honor, Mr. Teague. You don't owe me a home for it." "It's not owing," Aaron said. "Or it didn't start as owing. But you kept my whole world alive on the word of a man who's gone, and I came home a ghost expecting ash. And the first living thing I've felt since the war is sitting right here, telling me she'll leave. We've both lost enough to the war, Iris. Let's not lose this too. Stay. Not because Will sent you, and not because I owe you, but because I'm asking, and because I think we've both been alone in the wreckage long enough." She stayed. It began as the partnership he'd offered. 2 war-broken people working one beloved piece of ground, each carrying griefs the other understood without explaining. But you cannot rebuild a life beside someone, season after season, sharing the labor and the weather and the grief the same war put in both of you, without coming to know them all the way down. And Iris watched the hollowed-out soldier she'd found in the yard slowly fill back up with life. Watched Aaron Teague come home to himself, season by season, on the land she'd saved for him, the war's long shadow lifting off him a little more with every harvest. He gave Will Vance a proper marker on the rise beside his own parents, because Iris had no grave for her husband, and it seemed right that the man whose last words had saved the place should be honored on it. And the day they set the stone, Aaron understood fully what he'd only begun to feel, that the war had taken everything from both of them, but that the same war, by the strangest and most roundabout mercy, had brought a soldier's widow across a ruined country to his door, and given 2 forgotten people a second chance at a whole life on one good piece of land. "It's a strange thing," he told her one gold evening, the 2 of them on the porch, where she'd first dropped a basket of his mother's flowers at the sight of him. "Will Vance traded pictures of home with me in the mud 4 years and a lifetime ago. Just 2 homesick men. And those few words, 'Go to Aaron Teague's place if you're desperate.' They outlived him and crossed a whole ruined country and saved my family's land and brought you here. He gave you the one thing he had left to give, and it turned out to be the saving of us both. He'd be glad," Iris said softly, "that his last words built something instead of being lost like everything else the war swallowed." She looked at the thriving ranch in the gold light, saved twice over now, once by her and once by the 2 of them together. "I came here a widow with nothing, to hold a dead man's land for a man I thought was dead. I never expected to find a home. I surely never expected to find." She stopped, coloring. Aaron Teague took the hand of the woman who'd kept his whole world alive. and he knew exactly what she'd never expected to find, because he'd found it too. They married that autumn on the rise where Will Vance's marker stood beside Aaron's parents, because Iris said Will ought to be part of it, having been the reason the two of them ever met. And Aaron loved her the more for saying it. And the Teague place thrived for 40 good years under the two of them. The ranch a war had nearly killed, and a war widow had saved. Worked by two people, the war had broken, and the land had healed. He had come home from the war 2 years late, braced with everything in him to find ruin and ash, and found instead a quiet woman in his mother's garden, who had kept his family's whole life alive on the strength of a dying soldier's last words. And in the end, he understood the truest thing the war ever taught him, that even out of the worst wreckage a man can imagine, life finds its stubborn way back, that a single act of decency can outlive the man who spoke it, and cross a whole ruined country to do its quiet work, and that sometimes a forgotten soldier rides home, expecting only to bury what's left of his old life, and finds instead, waiting in his own yard, the whole bright beginning of a new one.